Cool. So if you were going to taste some of these chocolates, how would we go about doing it? Or what's the next step in this experiment?
There's a lot of different ways to taste chocolate. The most important thing is just to sort of take your time and really pay attention to what is going on in your mouth. And, and every time I put a piece of chocolate in my mouth, I really try to just pay attention. And so that's really the most important thing. And there's you can sort of go either way. You can go from dark to light, or you can go from light to dark. I tend to prefer to go dark to light. So why don't we start with the 82% extra dark? Okay.
All right. So we have the piece here. We'll do this at the same time. Now, do you put this in a particular place in your mouth?
No, I usually put it in my mouth, chew it up for a little bit, and then I just sort of let the flavors coat my tongue, and then breathe in, and just try to
through your nose or through your mouth.
Through my mouth. But just find sort of what works for you. Everyone has sort of a different technique that maximizes their ability to sense the flavor. But
I want to be. I can pretend to be a wine snob now. So I'm working on my repertoire for being a chocolate snob as well. Good. All right. So I'm missing the vocabulary. So how would you describe this?
Well, I like to look at eating chocolate as a very temporal thing. I mean, all flavor really is, whether it be wine or cheese or chocolate. So in the beginning of this flavor experience, for me, I noticed that right on the onset there's a lot of sort of fruity flavors, and sort of a dark brown fruit. It's almost figgy. There's a little bit of a tobacco note in there, sort of a sweet note, and it really evolves into sort of a slight astringency, a little bit of a winey note. This is definitely a chocolate it's very complex. Some of our best beans, and it really has a lingering finish. Oftentimes, tasting a piece of chocolate, you might want to even leave 2 or 3 minutes. We won't do that today.
No, that's fine.
But really take your time.
The finish.
That's the important thing. Yeah, the finish can really change and morph even long after you sort of have it out of your mouth.
Like a good Scotch, Gennaro. Yeah. The man on the camera knows his Glenlivet. I may have to punish him for introducing me to Scotch, but it's good, in moderation again. So let's, if you don't mind, because I've had vast quantities of 70%, which I love it.
Yeah.
Let's try something on this scale. I've never had 75. I'd actually be curious to test that.
Yeah, absolutely. Please. Let's try this. This is also unique. It's a very different blend than any of our other bars. Okay.
So now, did you travel to each of these countries yourself in the process of sourcing these beans? We have Trinidad, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, and coastal Venezuela. Yeah. Over what period of time?
With the exception of Grenada, but a coworker went there. So.
Well, this is great. Now, how would you contrast that to the 82?
Well, I think this, there are similarities in that it has fruitiness, but the Antilles bar, I really pick up more of a ripe fruit flavor. It's not as much of a dried fruit. This is more of, it has some citrusy notes.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I were going to contrast it to wine, it seems like that would have more tannins, whereas this would not. It's
and part of that is the sugar level, but the majority of that difference really lies in the variation between the beans, and beans can be very, very different.
So if you have, for example, coffee, right? So I also like coffee. We were talking about this before, about sourcing coffee, and I've been to coffee plants and factories and so forth in Costa Rica and other places. So depending on how long you roast something for, it can really change the flavor. So you have these beans that have their own characteristics from each country and each, I suppose, latitude and so forth. How important is the duration of roasting? Are all the beans roasted for roughly the same amount of time?
No, every bean has its own unique profile. So a bean from Ghana, for instance, is going to have a different roast time than a bean from Madagascar, than a bean from Java to Venezuela to Costa Rica. So each one is very unique and needs to be really looked at in its own.
Okay. Cool. So do you want to? What would be your next pick of this bunch?
Well, why don't we?
And I have to ask you.
Yeah.
Of these, if you had to choose your personal favorite, of course, to put you on the spot, which one would it be? And understanding that each has its own place.
Sure.
Just like a good glass of wine, depends on if it's after dinner, dessert wine, or whatever. But what would be in general, your indulgence of choice?
Well, I think I'd probably pick the Antilles. I really love the Antilles.
It is good. That's my first time trying it. That's really yummy.
I really love that sugar level.
Now, when you say
75%.
Okay, so if it's 75%,
it's 25%,
cacao, right? So 25% by volume is roughly sugar.
By weight.
By weight.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And you mentioned there's lecithin.
Lecithin, yeah.
Is that an emulsifier?
It is. Exactly.
So what is? So maybe we could.
You're a chocolate.
I'm trying to find out. So what is lecithin used for? Maybe you could explain what an emulsifier actually does.
Well, an emulsifier for our purposes is really there's a lot of different ingredients that go into chocolate. Well, especially when you're looking at in short, chocolate has fat, and there's also sugar, and so to really allow those to combine well, and it requires an extensive grinding process, and also a process known as conching.
Okay.
Conching. Yeah. Okay. And so adding soy lecithin really enables the chocolate to become much smoother, and it allows it to have a better mouthfeel.
Right. That makes sense. So it's like if you imagine oil and water.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting those to mix properly.
Exactly.
The process of emulsification. Yeah. Conching. That's a new one.
Yeah.
Very cool. Do you want to try one of these?
Yeah, let's try the...
what would you choose?
Let's try the 62 and then we'll move to the milk.
And what does semi-sweet mean?
Semi-sweet is sort of it's a very broadly used term, as is bittersweet.
So what would those two... If somebody goes into the store and they say, okay, well, I know what dark means, I know what milk chocolate means. Bittersweet, semi-sweet, no idea.
Yeah. Well, I think...
I'm going to get a head start.
Yeah, please. Semi-sweet is really... Semi-sweet and bittersweet are very broadly used terms, and there are some legal definitions, but they don't really apply in a lot of ways to some of the chocolate that we're looking at here today. In reality, it's really, and one of the reasons why people are starting to use these percentages of cocoa is because it really helps people understand exactly how dark a chocolate can be. And so a semi-sweet can really run the range from anywhere from 40% cocoa content all the way to maybe 62.
Okay.
Or more. And then a bittersweet can also range from 35 and 40% all the way to 85%.
Wow.
So there's really, they're sort of a bit antiquated terms.
So now, soy lecithin has its own health benefits also, just as an additional excuse for me to continue to eat chocolate.